Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Creating a Fantastical Life podcast. It's Jen, and today I have with me a very special guest. We have Mattia Mauree, and Mattia is a interdisciplinary composer, life coach, and hypnotist, helping neurodivergent creatives love their brain. Mattia and I met in a marketing course for life coaches and for entrepreneurs, and they have just been incredible. We've had the opportunity to meet in person, and I love you and the way that you work and your brain so much, so I'm very excited to have you on for 12 days of breakthroughs.
Yay, thank you so much.
This whole season is about undoing conditioning, deep conditioning that people have been taught that they have to be. So I want to start by asking you, what was something that you were brainwashed to believe about yourself or other people or about the world that you just later found out was not true at all?
The word brainwash, it hits close to home because I was homeschooled literally by people who didn't want me to be exposed to ideas. So I was actually brainwashed as a child. And it's interesting because I feel like the first thing that came to mind when you said that was just this idea that there's one way to be. Because despite what I just said, both my parents are actually neurodivergent. So even though I was like very sheltered, I was also getting the message it's fine to be weird. It's good to be weird. Like if anything, being weird is better. Like I think they were kind of down on normal people in a way. So some of the messaging I might have gotten as a neurodivergent kid in that sense I didn't get. But what I did learn from them was the only way to be worthy, be acceptable is to achieve a lot and like work very, very hard. And you have to work hard to get anywhere. And I think that all of those things together, to me, like the thing that I learned that I realized pretty quickly could not be true is that there's just like one right way to be a person and function. And anyway, I just said all that to say it wasn't necessarily that I was being given like the neurotypical bullshit, like
Right.
specific, but I was still being told like there's one way to be, and it's like this very narrow, in this case, religious way. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I had no idea. That's so interesting. So what was your journey like to uncover that, like to first like uncover that you didn't have to be a super high achiever and like religion was like this only way? Like how did you first come to that?
Well, being queer and coming out as a teenager started the move away from religion because that did not go well. So that was kind of the beginning of that. And then something that's really common for adult diagnosed neurodivergent people is, and especially non-men, because I'm non-binary, is having depression and anxiety. So people who have like, so I was, seeking help for that. I was like, I'm depressed and I feel like shit all the time. And as I started to get support and help over time, I realized, uh, I'm not normal. Kind of like I knew that, but that was such a big shift for me to go from viewing myself as broken to viewing myself as different and like
Mhm.
genuinely believing that. And then to answer the question about achieving, I would say I've just gotten there in the last like year or two where I really feel like I the way that I've put it to myself is if I just stopped achieving now, I would still be proud of myself for the things that I've created as
Mhm.
an artist. And that's not something I've ever felt before. So I don't know that there's an easy pat answer of how to get to that because I think everyone's different. But part of it for me was um, recognizing that the the process is more important to me personally than the work, which I think is a good, like an easier foundation for an artist. If you only care about the achievement, it's actually really stressful because anybody who does creative work knows, you're trying to either get grants or funding and you're being turned down all the time. You're applying to, commissions or, to get performances, you're being turned down all the time. Like you hear no a lot, which I think, again, entrepreneurs also connect with, like when you're hearing no a lot, I think it's really hard if all you care about is the achievement because you
Mm.
need that external validation to even want to keep going. And
Yeah.
so it was just this like multi-year process for me of being like, okay, I'm deciding to attach more to the process than the outcome. And I'm doing this because I love it and I genuinely like making the work, even if I'm not necessarily seeing, the big numbers or achievements attached to that immediately.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions that I have popping up for you about that. But let's backtrack a little bit for people who are listening and are like maybe new to the term of neurodivergence. What is neurodivergence? And then if you can share also like what your neurodivergent labels are.
Yeah. So neurodivergent is a large umbrella that basically means your brain at a physical level functions differently than, quote, normal. And depending on how broad the umbrella is, it could be more than half of people, right? Because some neurodivergence people will describe it as including everything, including, say, anxiety and depression. But certainly kind of some of the original things that started moving us toward this term were autism, which I have, and ADHD, which I have. So those are my labels.
Awesome, thanks. And so with that, because the coach that we both worked with, Simone, she has ADHD. I was able to learn a lot about it, and something like being able to enjoy the process more was something that she kind of defined as a trait of ADHD people, is like you can't make yourself really do anything for external validation.
Yep.
But for you, a lot of what I'm hearing, right, is that you were trained into being very high achieving, this like outwards look of success. And then you found for yourself what the process and what pieces of the process you actually enjoy to redefine success. Can you talk more about that and like how you made that switch?
Oh, what a good question. So looking back to how I was trained to care about achievement, unfortunately, it's the sort of classic, not great parenting move of only giving your kid affection when they're achieving. So it was that, unfortunately. So
Oh, I feel you.
that was trained in pretty hard. I'm also the oldest of 7. And as just one random example, 2 of my siblings were in the National Spelling Bee at different years. So that's, that's the kind of level that we were expected to reach, but with very little support or help individually. So whoever was doing the most impressive thing at the time was the only person my mom was talking about and like giving attention to, basically. So like you could get stuff from my parents, including affection, if you were sort of doing the most impressive thing. I'm happy to say my siblings and I did not actually end up like directly I don't know, fighting each other for that attention. It was more just we were all like on our own track, freaking out. That's how it felt. So that was kind of like that's the foundation of where that came from. And then I had some early experiences with achievement that also helped me like actually get where I wanted to go. Like I started college when I was 14 and I got to move out when I was 15, and that was awesome. So like that was an achievement thing that let me do something that actually was very meaningful to me. So I think that also started to, and winning some things young as well, just kind of looking at that and going, okay, these get me where I want to go, I think, because what I thought I wanted was just the achievement, because I was like, this is what gets me what I need. And then I would say pretty quickly, like even, I don't know, by the end of my teens, I was just like, this is not giving me the feeling that I want. And when I lose or when I don't get the thing, when I'm rejected from something, I feel so shitty. And you can't live that way as an artist. I feel like it's like there's a lot of, stereotypes about artists being depressed. And I don't think it's that depressed people make art. I think it's that it's hard to be an artist in this world sometimes. So there's that. And I mean, I think the first way I started moving away from it was just realizing this isn't even giving me what I want. This isn't producing the feeling that I was hoping it would produce. What would? I had a really good therapist who asked me a question, and this had to be probably like 8 years ago. Maybe she asked me this question, at least 6 years ago. She was like, what would you have to do? Like, how would you have to feel, or what would you have to achieve in order to feel like you were enough? And I was like, literally nothing. There is nothing. There is no upper limit.
The limit does not exist.
I was like, that's a very good question with no answer. And I wrote that on a Post-it note. Like I wrote that question on a Post-it note and just had it next to my desk for like 2 years. So I did not answer that question. I literally just kept looking at it and being like, I still don't think there's anything. I was like, what award would I have to win? Like what list would I have to be on to feel like I'm enough? And I was like, I don't think there is anything. So the conclusion I came to after being unable to answer that question for a couple of years was, I have to unhook those things in my brain, like the achievement and the worth, because I just, as I was, and I achieved I have some cool awards. Like it just wasn't making the thing happen. So I think, I mean, what went into it in terms of my own process is probably like too long to go into, right? Because it's like my entire healing journey.
I'd love to do that.
Every single thing I did. But I definitely noticed that choosing projects, and again, this is from the creative, artistic side, but choosing projects that I loved and that I genuinely wanted to do versus how impressive I thought they might look helped. Other things that helped were celebrating myself more for wins I'd already achieved. So I have a big tendency to like finish a piece, have the premiere, and then never look at it again. And like, I don't try to get them published. I have had sometimes directors reach out to put something in a film, and I do film composing as well. But like, I'm not like trying to put my work out there. I just kind of do something, then I'm like, cool, next, throwing them behind me.
Right.
So that was another big thing, was like celebrating what I've already achieved. And I think that was what helped me get to that. Like, you know what, if I just like stopped achieving now, it would be okay. Like I've actually already reached some of the milestones that I wanted to reach career-wise, which is amazing. And now it's like, what next? What else? And it's like, well, I want to do this stuff because I love it and it's fun, and not because, I won't achieve worthiness without it.
Yeah, it sounds like there's been multiple turning points, right, in that journey, because I think the turning points are really interesting. That's where people are most likely to like actually change and pay attention to like who they really are, where they want to go, and like all the stuff in between. Like your 2 years of having that sticky note is just kind of like the muck that you kind of got to be in. But for you, it really sounded like first it was realizing that there was no upper limit of like when you were going to feel successful enough or good enough or whatever. And then that led you to being able to get to the next turning point of figuring out like how is it that you can actually enjoy the process and like celebrate yourself. Can you dive a little deeper into like how you celebrate yourself? Because there's so many different ways that people think, and like for me, someone who like does not enjoy alcohol or drinking or like partying and clubbing and all these things that like traditionally people associate with celebration, I was like, how the fuck do I celebrate myself? And for me, it was like dance and being with friends. But how is it that you celebrate?
So I also hate clubbing. This is loud and awful. And I'm also not drinking right now. So one thing I've been doing for a while that actually was really helpful is I have this like beautiful notebook with thick paper, like handmade paper. And I write down all of my wins with the date next to them. And actually I haven't written it in a bit because I care so much about like writing them in the right order. So I'll like wait until like making sure I'm, filling them in, whatever. That's just me being a little bit of a perfectionist about it. But, but I have this notebook that's like, won this award, or even something I'll put in there when I apply to things too. And this is this is a real game changer. If you do something that has high rejection, I can't remember where I heard this first, but it was somebody who had a rejection quota for the year. And I just picked 100. And I did this for a couple of years in a row. So I had on my wall, I had a little, like, it was just little check boxes that I printed out in Word. And it was like rejection quota for, blank year. And every time I would get a rejection, I would actually be excited because I'd be like, I get to take my pretty little rainbow pencil that I have and and mark off a rejection.
Yeah.
So that's funny because it's like celebrating rejection actually helped change. It literally changed my brain. It changed my attitude toward rejection completely. So that was super helpful. Another one is when make a project or, I'm involved in something that I'm really proud of, which didn't used to happen as often. Now it happens more often, which is nice. When I have something I'm really proud of, I try to share it as though it's an offer in my business, meaning, I'm putting it out there repeatedly. I used to, again, I would have a performance, say, have a recording, be like, okay, guys, here's the YouTube link, place it once, and then just like not share it again. And now I'm like, hey, I did this EP, this collaborative EP. I love it. And I've been sharing that repeatedly because I keep having friends who are like, you did an EP. And I'm like, yes, September. So anyway, that's another thing is like, and letting that part be fun and easy. So I'm not treating it like a chore thing I have to do. It's just like, hey, I'm proud of this thing. When I think of it and I'm like, I hope people are listening to this, I post it and I'm just like, hey, the thing, here's why I'm excited about it right now.
I love that. And I don't know what it is about stationery, but like I have this very similar love for stationery and good paper, good notebooks. I had to have like golden like star stickers to help me track progress before too. And like that was like a little like, oh, cool, dopamine celebration. But when it comes to conditioning and like if you're taught to be a high achiever, right? And that is the thing to do. When you say like you made it about the process and you've allowed things to be fun and easy, that sounds scary to a lot of people who are like, hustle, you got to work. It's like work as fast as you can do it, right? What was that journey like for you undoing it, or like what came up for you in that?
Yeah. So again, I'm viewing this through specifically kind of a creative lens, just because that's, what I've been doing since I was 3 years old. When I am frustrated about something I'm creating, and this goes honestly for entrepreneurial stuff as well. When I'm frustrated about it and in kind of like, to me, hustle energy is I have to make it happen. I'm on a deadline of some kind, like there's like time or like a pressure attached to it to me in hustle. And there's like a fear of failure. It's like, I don't want to do this wrong. So those are the things that I kind of associate with that feeling. When I have that feeling about something I'm creating, it's not like that's the best work I do, right? When I'm like, it's like when you're writing the paper on the last night that it's due, or, creating something just because of what feels like pressure. That's almost never my best work. My best work is when I'm getting into flow and it's fun and I feel like, the connections are happening in my brain, creative stuff is happening. Again, this like across anything I'm working on. So I just found that, and also another thing about like actual flow states, like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's flow states, you are 400 to 500% more effective and creative when you're in a flow state. So I was like, look, I can arrange my life to have, to work 4 or 5 times harder and hate it, or I can arrange my life to be able to get into flow states at least a couple times a week and like knock the workout and have a good time and get all those fun brain chemicals that you get from flow. So I'm kind of obsessed with that. And once you start working that way, it's really hard to go back. And it's maybe almost a little dangerous in that sense if you also are neurodivergent because of the interest-based nervous system, or like that's all I want to do is what I'm interested in. And so now I know how good it feels to do something I'm interested in while I'm in flow. And so trying to get myself to do something really boring that I just don't want to do, my body is just like, it's like a child like laying there being dragged along. Just like, absolutely not.
I totally get that. It took me weeks to just like go do some returns and go to the post office. So like, that being said, how do you prime yourself into flow state? Like what can people be doing if they want to find their flow better? And I guess this is another separate question, but for you, I know you've also recently gone through some life challenges with Darcy and your partner. How have you kind of been able to take that time to deal with life challenges when you also want to be in flow and you want to create? And, being a creator is some people's like main piece of identity, like how they connect with themselves, and if that doesn't feel accessible.
Oh, such good questions. Okay. So very briefly, some things that prime flow. There are a bunch of triggers that help us get into flow, but some of the easiest ones are clearing out visual clutter, because focus is actually a process of actively ignoring everything in your brain and in your field. So there's something called cognitive load when you're like, when you have little stressors, trying to remember something that you haven't written down, stuff like that. So like doing a brain dump and just kind of getting stuff out of your head, literally clearing your physical space, even if you don't think that you need this. So some people are like, my space is messy and I don't care. Try taking everything in your visual field and just pushing it behind you. It can be back there. That's fine. But literally just like giving your brain, just taking away some of that cognitive load and just some of that latent stress that you might not even notice because we're so used to it. So that's a first thing. Next thing is, and also for focus, like if you need, headphones and closing the door, letting people know you're going to be focused, like that's a big part of it. There's also this challenge skill ratio. So you want it to be challenging and interesting, but not terrifying. So it needs to be like just enough. And the number that has come out in research is like 4%. I don't know how you would know exactly what amount of, like, I don't know what that means, but, but you're stretching a little bit, but it's like, it's a fun stretch. It's like doing a little bit more. And, another big one is getting, immediate like feedback of whether the thing is like, if you're headed in the right direction, having like a clear goal of what you're trying to do in the session, and kind of like being able to tell as you're doing the thing, am I heading in this direction? That's a little bit harder to explain like super briefly.
You don't have
And
to be
then,
brief. You
yeah.
can go into it.
Yeah,
We're
but
all here to
all,
learn.
so, and then the other thing that I always want to tell people is that getting into a flow state, and just briefly what a flow state is, um, it's a release of a whole bunch of good brain chemicals that feel really good. And it's a hypo activation, meaning less activation in the part of the brain that basically is our critic. So that just kind of like, like shuts
Mm.
off. And so we have more access to making connections in the brain. It's like a little bit more, but not, it's not the entire brain just being turned on. It's actually this particular little part in the front of the brain being turned lower, so we can just do stuff. And we're actually not, criticizing. Like, this is not editing, this is creating. So when you're editing, you actually want that critic to be on, because you're like, is this good? Does it connect? Right? Like all that stuff. This is just like, oh, look, this thing over here, and I can just mush these two things together, and now it's this, stuff like that. That's all flowy. And at the very beginning of the flow cycle is a brief challenge phase where it feels bad. And everybody needs to know that, because sometimes it's when we're like thinking hard about a problem, when we're really engaged with something that again meets that challenge skill ratio, where we're like, yes, I want to dig my teeth into this problem. I'm excited to solve this. And no thoughts are occurring to me. I'm just staring at it and nothing's happening. That's actually an important part of the process. It's sometimes as little as only 5 minutes, but it can be longer depending on what your own flow cycle is like. But it's important, I think, to know that that's going to happen every time. Like, we don't just go, I'm going to be creative, and then just like whoosh, all the the challenge
Yeah.
state is actually norepinephrine ramping up in the brain, which we need to set off all the other brain chemicals. So it's actually giving us this like the frustration is like our body ramping up to give us all the rest of the flow. So
Just to clarify, are you saying that frustration happens at the beginning, or like once you
yeah,
start? Okay.
once you're like engaged and like focused, and
Mm.
you've got what you're working on, and it's right in front of you, like when you start. So
Yeah.
anybody who writes, I feel like this is just, this, right? You sit down to write and you're just like, at the beginning, it's just like terrible. And then something just kind of releases. That's that getting into the flow state.
Okay. So just to help people discern a little bit more, is it like, so first understanding like the flow state, right? Challenge and skill level has to be at this nice, it's almost like the bell curve, right? Or I guess intersection piece.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But for people to discern like what is something that is challenging enough but not too challenging, is using their emotions like a great indicator, where you said like, okay, I'm excited for this challenge versus this challenge is kind of like looming, like scary, whatever, versus this challenge is something that I'm just choosing because I feel like I can do it and like I know I can pretty much do it, but like that might be too easy. How do people discern better?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Okay, and again, just like from my experience as an artist, it's like, okay, I know I can finish this thing. Like I can see kind of what the whole thing is, but I'm gonna have to do a bunch of sessions of like really kind of gritty work to get there. So it's kind of like sitting down for one of those sessions and going, okay, I don't know exactly how I'm getting to the end of this. Like, I don't, the larger work, but I have a sense of like that I can do something with it. Like there's something here, I can start with it. And then you're again just kind of sitting there with the pieces or whatever you have to do. One way that I work with that is I do try to map things out a little bit. And again, everybody's different, but if you again having a clear goal for the individual session can help. So if you've set aside, I usually recommend 90 minutes. Again, everybody's different, but that's just like a pretty typical flow cycle where you'll kind of get through that challenge phase, get through it and kind of like get some enjoyment out of it. And flow states are those times when you lose track of time, when you're in a full flow state. So I've had ones go 3 hours where I didn't even notice that had happened. Ideally, you kind of take a break every 90 minutes or so for most people is an ultradian rhythm. So it's a good time to like get a snack, get some water, go to the bathroom. Like you don't necessarily want to just hunker down for the maximum amount of time possible. Because you can actually kind of use up those brain chemicals and then be really exhausted and tired. So you may want to do that if you have a big deadline coming up. But for like the day to day, honestly, if I can get 90 minutes of flow time a day, that's like amazing. And I'm not there right now because of what you mentioned, like actual life circumstances. So I think I said earlier, like right now I'm thinking about 2 times a week is when I'm trying to get some flow in and like that feels good right now. I would say in the, month after 2 big difficult things, I was really just trying to take care of my nervous system overall and just like get a little bit done. I had a launch that I pushed out, I kind of like I also have a small book written that I'm going to self-publish and I was planning on having that out by now. So there are things that I'm just like, you know what, that can happen later. Again, like removing that time pressure. I think about this a lot. I feel like a lot of what we do, the time pressure is what makes it hard. If we didn't have any time pressure, if it was just like, oh, I'll get this done when I get to it, everything becomes easier, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring that up because it's almost contradicting in my mind, because in the sense of one of the best pieces of not advice, but like one of the best tools for me when I was looking at productivity for myself was when I was making those time blocks to do active like flow state work, was to write down what it was that I wanted to achieve in that time. So if that was like edit 2 podcasts or like finish the sales page or write 3 emails, whatever it was, having that goal was really helpful. But if I got distracted or I didn't finish that, like something took me longer than I thought it was going to be, or I got into like a little bit of a perfectionist, like I don't really know what I'm saying here and like whatever, then like I would be frustrated after and I'd be like, oh, right. And for you were mentioning like have a goal, but also where does the end result play into a part of how you feel rewarded at the end of this flow state, so that you want to do it again and like keep doing it, and that it shows as something that's rewarding for you to do, versus not being able to finish or like not getting the result that you want.
Yeah. Also another like interesting layered question. So what you were saying about, because I've done that as well. I've played with time blocking. My first thought from what you said is that, like, just from what you're talking about, I wonder if it would be easier for your brain if all of those things were drafts to get them done in that time.
Ooh.
So then the goal is I will have written the draft of the sales page, right? Not like it's ready to publish, because those are 2 different tasks, right? The drafting is the creative side. And then when I'm talking about editing, that's actually when you need the like judging brain to be like, actually, this only makes sense to me and isn't going to make sense to anyone else, right? So those are actually 2 different tasks. So that's like certainly one thing I think of is separating out the original writing versus the editing.
That's
And
so
the
good. That's really good
original
discernment.
writing is better for flow.
Love that.
Yeah. Or even like I mean, it can be editing, but like it's very different to like dive into editing a a scene of dialogue for fun versus again like a sales page or like an email or something. So again, like that's just like what I think of with that. What was another part of that question?
Like if the end result plays a role into how much you want to do flow state, and like if that matters, you to like accomplish something.
Right. So, and then also it being like rewarding. So flow states give us so much of the good brain chemicals all at once, like at least the 7 that we know of, including like anandamide, like all the ones that like make us happy, basically, we get them all. So they made up a term in flow research called autotelic because they didn't want to say addictive, but it is. If you are achieving flow states on a regular basis, you do not need any additional motivation. It feels fucking great. Most people who start finding flow on their own, it makes you stay in a career. It makes you stay in if you look at kids doing both sports and music, the kids who are getting into flow are the most likely to stick with that thing. So you don't need to motivate yourself really if you're experiencing flow, which is why I love it. Because I'm like, if we can just like get more flow into your life, then you don't even need to be asking yourself about motivation anymore because you're going to want it. It feels really good.
So that's incredible. I love that. I love that term.
Yeah.
Autotelic.
So it's drugs. It's brain drugs. It feels good. And the funny thing is too, even with that said, like right now, it's not worth it to me to, again, be trying to organize my life to do that every single day, just because I know what it takes for me to do that. One other, I'm obsessed with this topic, obviously. If you get into a full flow state, the brain chemicals can last for up to 3 days. And then it's easier to get back into flow if they're already there. So if you can get into flow roughly every other day, it's very self-sustaining.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really
I didn't know
cool.
that. It's so interesting. So let's talk about, if it's okay with you, to dive a little deeper into what's been going on in your life and how that's affected your workflow, your flow, and how you're managing all that.
Yeah. So in September, my cat died, who I'd had for 15 years and who was like very much my emotional support buddy. And then I was, grieving that obviously. And then 2 weeks later, my partner almost died in a cycling accident and was in the hospital for 5 days. So I was just like, great, interrupting that grief to do like hair. And, they still can't lift anything. So, doing more stuff around the house. And one thing that's really, really hard for me, which is funny because I have all these like big skills that people are like, I can't imagine composing an opera. And I'm like, yeah, it's a thing that I can do. Right. Doing like dishes and like keeping the kitchen clean is so fucking hard for me. So there are these things, and this is another kind of feature of a neurodivergent brain, is there are things that are easy for other people that are really hard for me and vice versa. So I knew immediately, just because I know that those things are hard for me, that switching over to doing more maintenance tasks was automatically going to take a lot of the energy I use for creating. So I was like, okay, of the things on my plate, what do I absolutely need to be doing? And, or, like need, but like deep want, like, what do I want to make sure I keep up with? I was like, I want to keep publishing my podcast. I think I missed 1 week. And then I had a couple like mini episodes queued up I was able to use. So thankfully I kind of had some material. So I kind of had like a few weeks where that was very light, but I was able to kind of keep it going. I kept up with my current clients, obviously, like I had, like, I think I took a couple weeks off, to ask people to bump out. But for the most part, I was able to keep up with the like very light, like those things. I was able to keep up with current clients podcast. And then I have a commission that's wrapping up right now for an ensemble in Brooklyn. And weirdly enough, everyone involved had like a death in the family or like some big emergency or got sick all at the same time. So right as I was like, hey guys, I don't know when my brain's going to be able to get back to this, everybody was just like, none of us are doing anything for like 3 weeks.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that was
The
like,
universe is so weird.
exactly. Like unfortunate for everyone, but we were all just kind of like, great, let's catch up in a month. So like that just got kind of naturally elongated, which was really nice. That was probably the only thing on my plate where I was like, I felt like if I pushed through and made myself finish the next phase of it in a weird mindset and like not enjoying it, I just knew I wasn't going to like it. So I kind of, in that case, I kind of sat with it and I kind of, looked at it, the materials I had. I kind of had this next like little phase of writing to do. And I just like had a nice thought one evening after I was usually would have been done working. And I just like covered a sheet of paper with writing and actually ended up sending them a text score, which is a thing you can do. It's not written music. It's like descriptions of what I wanted them to do as a process. And I had actually never done a text score before other than one that I had published this year, which is why I was like, oh yeah, text scores exist.
I have never heard of that. So
Yeah,
I didn't even
it's a
know that was a
thing.
thing.
Yeah. So those are more process oriented pieces. So rather than saying you're playing exactly this note, you're saying, okay, you're going to start doing this. And you kind of give them instructions. It's like you're giving them process instructions rather than knowing exactly what it's going to sound like. So it's
Is
like
that like you're giving them a
improvisational sort
structure?
of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah. And some of them are looser than others. So I was trying to give them some like pretty, like they had times attached and kind of like, and now you'll do this and then you'll respond to the three of them, how they respond to each other. So anyway, in that case, I waited until I was in like an okay mood to do it, which is a tricky one in creative work because you can't always wait to be inspired. But I do wait until I don't feel like shit. I don't try to work when I feel like shit. It doesn't turn out the way I want it to. Then when I go back to edit later, I'm just like, I'm throwing this whole thing out anyway. That said, shitty first drafts are great. So sometimes it is good to just, and that's what I was doing when I was writing on the paper with that. I was just like, you know what? I have this idea. We'll see if this actually comes together. And when I looked at it all together, I was like, yeah, this works. I could send this to them. So I like typed it up, edited it, and sent it off. And that I think is a pretty good summary of like how I've been treating my brain and my process for the last few months.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. You can tell how well you know yourself and the way that your brain works, to be able to have like even a semblance of a plan, like because I think of it almost like an emotional plan, right? Versus this is what I'm going to do on this day. It's like, okay, if I'm feeling this, then I know how to respond to this. I know what I need here, or like whatever.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about how people can develop more of that awareness with their brain? And especially because neurodivergence is an umbrella term, but I guess not like the symptoms, but kind of the little pieces here and there that people can kind of look out for to help them partner with themselves better.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I always think of is just starting to look at it as data collection and not as like, a checklist of what's wrong with you. Right. So again, it's that, I'm not broken, I'm different. This is how I function. How do I actually function? And how do I function at my best? So that's a thing you can kind of look back at times in your life and, when was I getting into flow more easily, if that's something you've experienced? When was it just feeling easy for me to work? Like when was I enjoying what I was doing? What was happening around that? What kind of supports did I have? Did I have people helping me with food, for example? Yeah, I did. Turns out when somebody's feeding me, I do way better. Otherwise, I just forget to eat. And then similarly, looking back at times when work was really difficult and you hated everything, probably not, I would say not full burnout. If you've ever been burnt out, that's not, I mean, like it's useful to look at the time before that, what got you into it, but like burnout is also a physiological process that just takes time to heal. So that's not necessarily going to be the most useful, but like if you've been burnt out, what got you there? What were you doing that was so hard that your system was just like, I need a fucking break. Like I'm out for, a couple months. So those are a couple things I think of. And just it's funny actually. I published an episode on my podcast today called Kittens and Consent about these feral kittens I've been feeding. and how
I've been following along so much. I love them. Oh my gosh.
they're
I
so
love them so
cute.
much.
And I've really been thinking a lot about how, um, like we're kind of trained to treat ourselves like feral kittens that need to be tamed. So I did a whole podcast on that, and how like we so in these guys' case, I've been thinking, if we take them in and like one of them kind of wants to be inside and one of them very much does not, what are we going to do? We have to trap them, right? Like they need to be in a cage or in a room. And like that's how we're trained to treat ourselves. I think especially neurodivergent people. But it's just like, okay, me, the kidney part of me, this wild part of me just needs to be like contained and put in a space, and like eventually it'll stop being mad and will, do what I want it to do and just be cute and cuddle me. Like,
Oh my God.
turns out
Yeah.
might not happen. I might just have an angry cat on my hand who destroys my entire fucking house because I didn't like do the work to actually seduce it enough and like
Mhm.
make it want to be here, you know?
Yeah, like that desire instead of like that
Yeah.
forced into what you
Yeah.
think you should be like.
And I think like I know this is such a silly example, but to me there's something really deep there of like how we don't care for ourselves or are like trained to, again, just kind of like put that part of ourselves in a room, like the wild, or the part of us that needs things. And then if we feel like shit, we're told it's because we're broken and there's something wrong with us, and we need, and I love therapy and medication, so like in no way am I saying like those are not good things, but like sometimes we're responding to actually very reasonable shitty experiences, and it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. You're actually having like a perfectly reasonable response to
Mm,
this not actually being the best situation for your own wildness.
yeah, 100%. I think when you had earlier shared an article about autism and what autism really is, how it's broken down, where it's not like you're more or less autistic based off of the spectrum. It's the spectrum because it's broken down into specific categories. And I think what you're saying of understanding what is a reasonable response for you versus what is a reasonable or like okay response based off of society can be so different. And I don't remember all the categories. I don't know if you can talk about that because I think it was so interesting just to read to understand all the things that our brain does, like communication and time processing. Um, can you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, so I think the article you're referring to is the one that had like the 8 different uh yeah, I don't remember what all 8 of them are off the
Okay,
top
all
of my
good.
head.
We'll link it. We'll
But
link it in the show notes.
yeah, but one way that I've heard it described that's really useful is that autism is a thing of extremes. So within each of those 8 categories, like, perception, sensitivity, right? Like all these different things, you are either, you know, don't, you're like extremely introverted and really don't want to be around people, or you like desperately need to be around people. You then anyway, so there's like they're kind of like looking at all these different things. It's like it's not that you're all the way on one end of each of these and that makes you autistic. The extremes are one of the things that like typifies an autistic brain. The other one is really recent study where they were looking at brains of autistic people postmortem, and the entire brain is different at a molecular level. The entire brain. So it is a neurotype, not a disorder. The brain is different all the way across, and especially in areas related to perception. So very sensitive, taking in a lot of information, gets overwhelmed because there's too much, like just too much coming in, which is great from a creative perspective when you can kind of like take that in and eventually regurgitate it out. But it does suck sometimes. That's why I hate
Yeah.
clubs.
Yeah, society is just not built to
Right.
cater to neurodivergent brains.
Yeah. And to
Um,
cater to the rhythm of like needing time off, like if
yeah.
like in a 9 to 5, which I've done 3 years out of the last 15 years since I finished undergrad. I've mostly not worked full time, but every time I have, like the night is not enough for me to recover from a day of work,
Mm,
you know? So like
yeah.
by the end of the week at one of my jobs, I was like, by Friday, I was getting a migraine like every week because my body was just like, I can't handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. When those situations happened, did you find yourself like masking, like just
Yeah.
kind of having to gaslight yourself into like
Yep.
being quote normal? And then can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that was an interesting, the specific job I'm thinking of where that was happening. I was working in recruitment and I came out as genderqueer at that job. So I was like coming out I was in that process of just starting to transition. And then I knew I was neurodivergent and I sought testing, I think, but I didn't have the autism diagnosis yet. I just went for ADHD testing during that time. So I wasn't really looking at my distress and my symptoms of distress as, uh, oh, it's obviously this, right? Like now I look at back and I'm like, oh, yeah, I was obviously just, overwhelmed. But one thing they had that like helped me get through it is I worked about 20 feet away from the little room they had for people to nurse or like pump breast milk. And it was just
Mhm.
like a comfy chair. And if nobody else was using it, I could just go sit in there. And I was able to do that. I did that like every day. So I either took a nap or like sat in there and just like had 15 minutes of quiet time like every day that I was overwhelmed. And again, like looking back, I'm like, it's so fucking obvious. Like,
Yeah,
why
like
I
just too much
needed that.
sensory input.
Yeah, exactly. But I was able to just like sit in there, with earplugs or headphones and just kind of like have a little break. And that made the like in-person day job doable for me.
Mm. I I love that you took that time, because like even for people who aren't neurodivergent, like just taking that time to be in your own energy and be quiet could be so super helpful. Um, but to kind of go along with masking behaviors, how can people start identifying? I mean, first, I guess like what masking is, and then like how can people start identifying when they are masking, and how to partner with their brains to actually not have to mask, and that if they don't mask, they can still produce at the same levels. They can even be happier, more successful if they don't try to put on this front.
Oh, that's so juicy and good. Yeah. So masking is everybody does it to some extent, but masking, is specifically when people talk about it in the autistic community, it's um, putting on activities, behaviors, facial expressions that you wouldn't normally use that aren't necessarily natural to you, but that you're using because they're effective or they make people treat you better. And like a very small example of how a lot of people use it is makeup, right? For some people, makeup's genuinely fun, but also for women who don't wear makeup, they make less money in corporate America. So, right, like there are people, they're just like, you know what? I just need the extra $1,000 a year. I'm wearing the makeup, or whatever that number is now.
Interesting. Is it that like clear cut in their head?
Yeah.
Like it's
I don't
interesting.
think people necessarily are thinking that, but like there is an actual like numerical value associated with how you present yourself in certain industries. So again, thinking back to, working in recruitment, this like weird little for-profit firm, I don't think I would have done well there if I wasn't masking. Not that I was doing like super great anyway, but it was my longest day job in one place and I did get promoted. Um, like that was such a specific environment where the politics of how people interacted actually mattered, that I think if I had just been like, here's my whole self, right? Like for me, coming out as genderqueer was the thing that was kind of pushing a little bit. And it was okay. It went mostly okay. Um, but I think if it's really important for people not to mask, over time, who you're hanging out with changes because, it may happen that you start unmasking and it actually doesn't go well. So I tell people to trust themselves on that front and don't push it. Do it because it's for you. Do it because it feels better for you to not do it. But if you're just like, you know what, it's safer for me in this environment to present this way or to just kind of continue presenting the way I've been presenting, like if that feels better, um, you're probably picking up on a real thing. Right. And like I have lost friends who were just like, yeah, I don't really like they don't jive with masking less and they liked me better before. Nobody has said that exactly, but like again, you're kind of like we're used to picking up on cues. Um, and I think sometimes I can tell that people are just like, oh, yeah, no, I liked you better before.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, and that's
creatively,
our.
like you working
Mhm.
with my own brain, like absolutely 100% worth it creatively.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to, the spiritual development of being more you and becoming and understanding who you really are and letting yourself be that person, because there is a lot of pain and a lot of loss, or um it's a whole process of pruning these behaviors, people in your life, opportunities, jobs, and it's not comfortable to go through, but it is so rewarding and so necessary if you do really want to prioritize living an authentic and genuine life, and being free. So I love that do that and share that. So instead of me clapping. um so yeah, I mean, we're just about like wrapping up, but I want to ask, like, is there anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Ah, I'm in this really interesting place right now in my personal journey and in my work where I simultaneously believe that people can be happy as they are right now and they don't need to do anything in particular or heal anything in particular. Like everybody can find interesting and fulfilling elements of their life, no matter where they're at in their journey. And I also want people to have all the support that they want, if there is anything that they're, feeling called to look at or dig into or, do shadow work or any of that, like that they have the support around them that they need. So I've just been thinking, again, I don't have like a big answer around that. I just like trust your instincts. If you're feeling pulled in a direction to like look at something or work on something, by all means do it. And if you're just like, you know what, I'm good. I don't need to change myself. Like I'm fine.
Mhm,
It's fine. And
mhm,
it's fine to do breaks from healing work as well. And like just take time to integrate. So yeah,
mhm.
that's something I've been thinking about a lot.
Amazing. Well, thank you for joining today. And where can people find you? What have you been working on that people can find you if they want to work with you?
So I'm at mattiamauree.com. I'm the only Mattia Mauree on the internet. So I'm very easy to find. And the launch that I'm doing right now is for a program called Love Your Brain. Totally unsurprising title given everything I've been talking about, I know. And it's for mid-career creatives. And I define creative very broadly, by the way. You don't have to be just an artist, but people who have creative drive and love what they do. And we're doing two things simultaneously. We are one, significantly healing the nervous system, which means getting your brain and body on board. I go into more detail on the website, obviously. And then the second thing is making progress on a big creative and or business project. So something that's like deeply hooked into what you do, big enough to get your teeth into. And then basically, as we're working on the project, all your shit comes up for helping us specifically, targetedly heal your nervous system. And my goal is to help people level up whatever that means for them. Again, not in a hierarchical way, but just like expanding into the next version of themselves and actually feeling good when they get there. Because my experience of like leveling up and expanding is that it feels fucking awful, even if you're getting these achievement oriented things along with it, right? Even if you're making more money, even if you're winning awards, it's just like, if you don't have that support to take up the space and be like, yes, I get to take up this space. I deserve to take up this space. I deserve to be big and bright. Without that support, every level up for me has kind of felt like shit. So I'm here to help people birth
Yes.
that a little less painfully.
Yes. And like, honestly, this brings up something about your response to a hot take question that I had for you of what's the worst piece of advice that you've ever come across? You're like, just try harder. And
Fuck that.
well, yeah, like with your program, it's so many people are like, yeah, they just have to try harder. And that's a conditioning. So
Yeah.
what is the antithesis to that, to help people in your program?
The antithesis to trying harder, I think, is removing the blocks that are in the way. So rather than just like, okay, so for example, if you have like an energetic or psychological block in the way to taking action on something, I feel like the traditional advice is like, here's a hammer and chisel, get to it.
Oh my
Just like,
gosh, yeah.
yeah. And I'm like, actually, there's a tool called a lever, and we can just stick that right under the rock and just flip it on down the hill, and now it's gone. And that's why I've gotten so into hypnosis, is that even like very light hypnosis, even conversational hypnosis, can help people shift things. Like I've literally had people sign up for a few sessions with me, and then at the end of the first session, the problem's just gone. So then we just do other stuff for the rest of it. So yeah.
I love that. And like we're gonna have to have you back on to talk about hypnosis and how your brain works with that. But this is amazing. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your wisdom and your perspective. It's been really great for me to even just listen. So I can't imagine how other people are going to take it. But everything about how to find Mattia and how to engage with them is going to be in the show notes down below. And thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss out on any more opportunities to create breakthroughs in your own life. If you want to dive deeper into this work, make sure you check out the description box down below, and it's going to have all the links to my podcast, my newsletter, and an invitation to work with me one-on-one so that you can create your own breakthroughs this year. I'll see you in the next video.